Good morning. If you are just joining us, we're going to start in just a minute or two, just to make sure that everyone has a chance to sign on. Okay, well, it looks to be right about 10 o'clock, so we can get started. My name is Lauren Baines. I'm with 43 North. Thank you so much for joining us this morning for our next installment of the Small Business School. Today, I am joined by some really excellent guests from M&T Bank. We have Ben Rager and Luke Wopel, who are going to talk to us a little bit about reimagining and reigniting your business after COVID-19. The presentation today is going to talk a little bit about financing. It's going to be talking a little bit about strategy. And we're really just so excited to have both Ben and Luke here with us. If you have any questions along the way, please use the Q&A feature in Zoom, not the chat feature. We will try to get to all of the questions by the end of the presentation. If you do have like a quick question in the middle of it, that's fine too. We will get to everything that we possibly can. So just please use that feature. And without further ado, we will have Luke and Ben take it from here. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Lauren. Appreciate it. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining today. Luke and I are super excited to have a great conversation with you, answer whatever questions we can as we progress or at the end here. But we want to talk today about reigniting your business after COVID-19. We have all been impacted one way or another. And as business owners, you've experienced some of the largest economic impacts as a result of the pandemic. And we certainly understand that. And we want to provide just some tidbits, some thoughts, maybe just the opportunity when we wrap up here today for you to say, okay, maybe I've got to think a little bit differently about how to progress and proceed and look at our financing and our operating model as we shift into kind of that newer normal, as they say, right? So we're going to give you some advice and some tips for reigniting your business. And as you continue to weather this storm, we'll discuss some different credit options available to you as business owners, and then help you maybe think a little bit about what options make sense for both long-term and short-term needs. So first, though, let's go ahead and introduce ourselves. I'll start and I'll hand it over to you, Luke, in just a second. So I'm
Sure.
Ben Rager, and I'm the business banking education manager here at M&T. I've been with the bank actually almost exactly 17 years now. About a week ago, I celebrated my 17th year with M&T. My team, we focus on educating our sales teams on a wide variety of topics. It's items like credit, process, customer solutions. Very recently, it's PPP, as you would expect. And for the last 20 years or so of my career, I've focused entirely on local businesses, whether it's through the education side or as a relationship manager. Small business has been my life since the time I started banking. That's one of the reasons that I feel so passionate about a topic like this. So I'm excited to meet you and excited to talk with you today. So Luke, how about you? Can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Ben. Appreciate it. And Lauren, thank you for the introduction as well. Luke Wepple, I reside right here in Western New York in Buffalo. Similar to Ben, I've got a pretty long tenure at the bank. I'm actually celebrating 20 years with the bank this coming September, which is kind of an interesting milestone to reach. And I'm a little bit of what I call myself as a one-trick pony. I've only been in our business banking group since I've worked at the bank. I haven't worked in any other department. So I'm pretty well versed, and we'll get into a little bit of describing what business banking is, but traditionally it's just focusing on small and medium-sized businesses. I'm in a client-facing role, have been for 20 years. So I certainly have a good feel, more than likely, for the type of business. If you have a question, we certainly probably have a client that has a similar business and a similar situation. So hopefully we'll be able to give you some perspective, at least from our side. Ben, if you want to click to perfect. So a lot of people that live in Western New York, if you're on this call from Western New York, you have a feel for M&T, whether it's through the newspaper or you just some brand recognition around Western New York. But what some people don't understand is kind of how big M&T is. So when you look at some of the statistics, one of the largest banks in the country, the 20th largest bank in the country, you can see that M&T is headquartered in Western New York, but if you just look at the map, you can get, and that's actually branch distribution and location. You can get a sense for how large the bank actually is in the scope of what we cover. What started out relatively small in Western New York, the bank actually originated in Western New York in roughly 1856, celebrated 150 years of the bank a couple years ago. But you can get a sense of, if you follow along New York State, we pretty much followed the 90, Interstate 90, establishing and acquiring banks throughout, Rochester, Syracuse, Utica, Albany, and then the bank ended up going south with some acquisitions, whether it's New Jersey, New York City. Obviously, you can see the smattering in Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Northern Virginia. So, over the years, M&T is quite large. You might not recognize how big it is unless you kind of live it, like Ben and I do, every day. One of the more interesting tidbits of M&T that I've always found pretty fascinating is a long-term shareholder has been Warren Buffett through Berkshire Hathaway. And the interesting stat is he acquired shares of the bank for about $40 million in 1991, became a very large shareholder as the bank was going through that acquisition cycle. And today that is valued at about $800 million. So kind of the classic Warren Buffett buy and hold. And that, obviously rate of return is incredible, kind of typical Warren Buffett. And that also doesn't really include any dividends or actual share sales. So that's kind of what the stock is worth today. So he's certainly done extremely well on M&T, and obviously over the years thinks that we, know what we're doing, and is a nice shareholder to have, and nice guidance that he provides the bank from time to time. We certainly have, as you can see on the chart I referenced earlier, 750 full service branches. The dots represent the branches. So you can see, the overall distribution of the bank. If you kind of go down one layer in more of the department that I work in, Ben, if you can click to the next slide. I work in what we classify as business banking. So on the commercial side, it's really split between two separate departments. There's business banking, which is the small to medium-sized businesses. And then we have our middle market group who focuses on larger businesses. Certainly the bulk and the volume of clients that we service are in the business banking area just because of the sheer volume of small businesses that are in our particular markets. So as you can see, we put up some stats as far as how much support we provided during the PPP, during phase one, and we're knee deep in phase two. I would say the phase two numbers at this point are probably about half of what we have seen. And just because the revenue reduction measures really, there were several businesses that obviously couldn't apply this time for PPP. So it's kind of the reason why you're seeing kind of the half of the amount of volume, but still certainly a significant amount of volume coming through. You can see some of the recognition that we receive. These are Greenwich is an independent bank. They do a lot of research in banking. Every year they provide awards recognizing certain departments, certain areas of banking. And we receive 9 Greenwich Excellence Awards in 2019, which is a pretty cool thing. You can see we take SBA pretty seriously, whether it's doing PPP or just part of our business is doing SBA financing. We are the #1 lender in a lot of our core markets, Buffalo, Baltimore, Rochester, and then obviously you can see some of the other markets that we do very, very well from an SBA standpoint. If you can click to the next slide, Ben, that'd be great. So today we're going to focus on reigniting your business. In a lot of ways, when I sit and think about that, we've almost had to do it several times. As you think about, M&T, alone has had to sit there and reignite our own business several times during the pandemic. And I would assume, obviously the bank is a very large institution, but down to, a smaller business like yourselves who are maybe on the phone going through the same process that the bank is. So it's not really a number driven thing. It's more of reinvigorating yourself or reigniting your business to figure out what has changed and where do I go from here, which is certainly a kind of a loaded question. Before you can kind of get to start talking about options though, we've got to figure out what your actual need is. And that's probably the most important part of this whole conversation today and presentation, is trying to understand what your particular need is. We can certainly come up with lots of options, but unfortunately or fortunately, you're really the only person that understands your business better than anybody else. We can certainly help. And I say we, that's a collective we, whether it's, your banker, your accountant, your attorney, you might have a mentor that's out there, but nobody really understands at the end of the day in, day out needs of your business. So that's really an important part to kind of start with. Ben will get into a little bit more of what the options are from there. We're just kind of, guesstimating at what some of those could be, and then we'll kind of wrap it up with a review. So Ben, if you wouldn't mind clicking to the next slide, that's great. So when I think about reigniting your business, we certainly just watched the Bills have a very successful season. There's an old term from ESPN, circle the wagon. Nobody circles the wagons like the Buffalo Bills. I was thinking about this presentation for some reason. I kept thinking about that phrase, nobody circles the wagons like you do. So as you start to think about your strategy, you start to think about, well, like what particular area do I want to start focusing on? Ben, if you can give me a thought. Employees. We could probably spend all our time just on employees. Obviously, the backbone, and that's who makes the wheels churn, if you will. But a lot of thought, in my opinion, in just talking with business owners from the start of the pandemic to now, is surrounding employees. From I had to let some employees go, now I'm ready to rehire. Where do I find those employees? They've had to endure, some type of businesses had a lot of the tax benefit for unemployment, the extra $600. Certainly that was kind of a competing against their own business. Now people are maybe ready to rehire, or maybe that you're in an environment where you don't necessarily have to rehire, you have to reimagine what your employee base is doing. So, the old do more with less kind of idea certainly has come into play as businesses have gotten pretty creative at trying to figure out how many things, how many hats, how many activities can our employee base actually handle? And if they can't handle it, making decisions on either adding employees, or perhaps there's certainly some areas where, and you might even already have done this, is let some employees go because you actually can pick that up with other people that are currently on staff. One of the major topics that we hear is, where do I find employees, right? So it's not just where do I find employees, but then it comes to how do I pay for the employees? And we'll get into some of the financing options that are out there. You think about marketing, right? There's certainly a lot of businesses that have done a really nice job, social media platforms. Certainly, maybe they dusted off the website and engaged that a little bit, differently. But people need to know, if you're kind of reinvigorating your business or reigniting your business, they have to know that you're back in action and you're ready for the next chapter. And marketing really comes into play. But also comes into play in marketing is, do you have the budget set aside to pay for said marketing? So it's kind of a catch-22. Some people obviously are more creative and spend a little bit more time on some of the lower cost marketing options, aka social media, maybe even trying to drive some traffic to your website. But certainly marketing in a general sense, depending on your type of business, is a very important piece when you're thinking about reigniting yourself. Give me another topic, inventory. So obviously, if you're a service business, this isn't going to be a topic for you. If you're anything other than a service business, you are always thinking about inventory. And when I think about inventory in some of the conversations, I've heard kind of throughout the spectrum of issues. I've had the issue where they had a bunch of inventory, they went into the pandemic and they sold all of their inventory and they got through it. But when they start to reorder inventory to build that back up, they were having supply issues. So depending on where product is coming from, whether it's in the United States or if you happen to be sourcing product from abroad, there might have been supply chain issues to source inventory. And people have had to get pretty creative, whether that's changing suppliers, finding other suppliers, but certainly the pandemic has a pretty linear impact, right? If the end product is whatever inventory you're going to hold, wherever you're sourcing that, they're probably having the same issues that you might have had, whether it's employees, whether it's the actual sales environment that they're selling product into has shrunk a little bit. Inventory is a pretty important part of your business. And then it becomes down to, do I have enough inventory? If I don't have enough, where am I going to get it? And then, where we come into play is more or less having the conversation with you of how do I pay for it? Certainly financing comes into play as far as the strategy is concerned. This is more when you think about the people who are helping and advising you. Bankers are on your short list of people who you should be interacting with from financing, whether that's short-term and long-term financing. Ben's going to get into that a little bit. And then certainly, and we touched on this in an earlier slide, is what's kind of turned into maybe a dirty word in banking is PPP. We hear it, I don't know how many times a day I say PPP, but it's a lot. And that's basically coming on a year now of us talking and working on PPP. But there's no question it is a very valuable tool to be using to help you kind of get yourself back on your feet, to reignite your business. And if you haven't applied or looked into a PPP loan yet, I encourage you to do so. There is a ton of information out there, whether it's on our own website, mtb.com. You can go right to the sba.gov website. They have a ton of information. And certainly, I would say work with a bank who knows what they're doing with regard to PPP. Ben, I think I'm over to you for the next slide.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. And one thing to keep in mind, Luke, as you're saying about PPP, I'll just reference that with this next round, they've also expanded what you can use that for. Of course, the primary component of it is people, right? Payroll. But they've expanded a little bit this time around too. So as we're looking at some of these thought bubbles here, keep in mind that by researching and looking a little deeper into the options with PPP, it did change from what it was originally proposed or originally put out as back in April, I think. So take a look. There's some great opportunity to help you through some of this. And as we talk about opportunities, Luke was saying, I get the joy of talking about accounting a little bit here. So he gets to talk about, the thought bubbles and all that exciting stuff, but I got to give a little bit of an accounting lesson here. And it's really important, right? I know that everybody is good at running their own business, and you all have your strengths. Some are the finance side, some are the sales side. Some of you can do all of it and are very comfortable with it. But there's a couple pieces that everybody needs to make sure that they think about. And it really comes down to understanding the need and the associated financing opportunity, right? So each type of financing option really has its purpose. So lines of credit, credit cards, right? They're great for the short-term expenses, the items here on the left. And short-term expenses, just categorize them as something that would typically be paid in less than a year. And these are items like inventory, bridging that gap of the collection of your accounts receivable, which of course could be strained right now. Remember, as Luke's talking about, this is worldwide that we're dealing with. So if you've got clients across the country, if you've got clients across the street, they're all impacted, which has pretty regularly a negative impact on your AR, your accounts receivable. Short-term financing is typically what we would lean on to help with that, right? It also helps with payroll expenses, marketing, any other short-term needs. Conversely, though, the long-term financing is typically dedicated to, shocking, right, a longer-term need, expenses over 1 year typically. And this method of financing, they are perfect for purchasing equipment, vehicles, machinery, just any long-term need. So I'm going to dig a little bit deeper into each of these just to really drive home some thoughts. When you think about short-term financing, it's perfect to help fund the operating cycle. And that's what's pictured here. So the picture on the right, it represents the time it takes for you to convert an order into cash. So if you think about it, one of your customers walks in the door, they place an order online, however that is. From the time they place that order, you're starting at the top of this circle. And you're not back around until you collect the funds from that customer. That's your operating cycle. So the quicker you can construct your product or sell it, then the quicker you can collect your funds. But there is a gap there. Now, if you're a restaurant, your operating cycle is, of course, spins pretty rapidly. Someone walks in the door, they order a pizza or a sandwich or spaghetti, whatever that is, right? From the time that they place the order until the time they pay might be an hour or so. But of course, there's a little bit more to it than just that, right? There's ordering your inventory, paying for that up front and managing that. And that all gets figured into it, but it's pretty rapid. Cash businesses have a very fast operating cycle. Now, if you're a manufacturer, that operating cycle shifts. It gets much longer. All right. Let's say you are, I don't know, you put in fences or you order fences, whatever, you construct them, you manufacture them. Of course, that could be taking a very long time right now. My neighbor just ordered some fence in, I think, end of September, and it just came in, right? So the process is really slow. So that operating cycle from the time the order is placed until you can actually get paid is very long for a lot of manufacturers right now. Now, several of you on the phone, though, you might be a dentist, a hairdresser, a doctor. You're not dealing with that up front, that section about inventory. You're more focused on collecting that payment. But no matter what type of industry you're in, we all have the same goal. You want to sell your product or perform your service and then collect the funds. Really, I think the goal is let's get those funds collected as fast as possible. That's what matters, right? So the thing is, there is a gap between each one of these items here. And that's what we're talking about today. It's trying to figure out how to bridge that financing gap. Now, you might be inclined to use your own cash, right? That's a great way to do it. Maybe a line of credit. You might bridge that with credit cards. And given that the operating cycle is a big circle, you can see the importance of budgeting properly using those resources that I just referenced. So your goal is to get paid by your clients quickly so that you can take those funds and pay down your line of credit, pay down your credit cards, put those funds back in your pocket. If you don't pay it down and you just continue to go into the next cycle, then what happens is your line of credit, your credit cards, your cash, right? Your credit financing gets maxed out and you run into some trouble. Or your cash doesn't get filled back up. It just starts to get depleted. So managing this operating cycle and understanding the right products to help you finance against that is critically important. Similarly, when it comes to the long term, you still have to think about it. It's a different idea, right? Generally, but it's a lot of the same components. So long-term loans, they help, of course, with the fixed asset purchases or long-term capital needs. Items, again, that require that long time frame to repay, like equipment, vehicles, machinery, and even real estate. You're not going to purchase one of those with just one operating cycle. And that's why we've got the image on the right. This is called the capital investment cycle. It's made up of all of your operating cycles. So if you're operating a profitable business, That means that each operating cycle is generating excess cash or profit. That's what we like, right? That's what you like, especially. That profit is then used to help fund things like payments on your long-term debt, month after month and year after year. So continuing operating cycles, ideally profitable operating cycles, are going to spit out that profit that can help you finance these longer-term needs. Now, that longer-term debt that I'm talking about, the financing, of course, we call them business installment loans, term loans, equipment loans, vehicle loans, mortgages, maybe SBA term loans, all kinds of names for them, right? But the reality is they're something that you borrow to help you buy something long-term. I think we all generally have those ideas in mind, right? But you got to think differently sometimes. And in the midst of a pandemic, and as we're starting to roll out of that, ideally, right, as regulations shift, as we start to open up more to bigger capacities, as we finally get to a spot where you can start seeing a glimmer of light that we're going to get back to some sort of normal, you've got to really think of yourself almost as a startup business. And when what Luke was talking about, all those thought bubbles, what we're really thinking about here is how should you promote yourself again with employees and marketing, purchasing inventory, all those things, like you did when you were starting up for the first time. Now, I know that many of you maybe are in a generational business and startup is not something that you've ever had to do, but you've all had downturns, right? And as you kind of regroup and come back, you've got to think a little bit differently. We're just suggesting that you, in the scenario we're in today with the pandemic and starting to roll back out, that you really dig deep and think about how to use financing to help you with that. It's probably some version of short-term and long-term financing together. I mean, here's the challenge. Yeah.
I thought it would add a little something that just kind of came into my mind. You know, when you think about those thought bubbles, you know, there's way more than what we put on the presentation, right? And again, go back to nobody understands your business like you do. It might not be employees or inventory or marketing and whatever we had up there. Another area that, you know, might have popped up is, you know, you might not have been that impacted by COVID. Maybe you came out the other side and you're like, wow, my business has never been better. A good time, and where financing also comes into this as well, is there might be competitors that did not fare as well. Or what we're also seeing a lot of is people that, you know, maybe held on a little bit too long and didn't go through the business transition. They were kind of waiting and waiting and waiting, but then the pandemic hit and now they're like, okay, I should have done this maybe 3 years ago, but I don't want to see what the recovery of the pandemic looks like. So now it becomes almost offensive, right? In the sense that there might be some acquisition targets out there, small or large, and we've seen a lot of opportunities for opportunistic type of business owners that are maybe looking to expand when everybody else is just looking to kind of reignite, if you will. But that reignite could be thinking a little bit differently. Maybe you've never done an acquisition before, but you're now starting to see opportunities out there in the market. And the question is, how do you do that? And that's really where you've identified the need. You might want to expand through acquisition. And now you should be talking to, you know, a banker, an attorney, and some of the other players that can certainly help you through that type of transaction. I just thought it was a good thing to note at this point, Ben.
I love it. Yeah. Thanks, Luke. I appreciate that. And with that in mind, right, we still have this same challenge of, do you look at short-term or long-term financing to help you with those scenarios? So, you know, that is really the big challenge. How do you equip yourself to succeed with financing? So as we think about it for the pandemic purposes here, right? Many of you have been able to defer payments while your business might have been shut down or while revenues were reduced as a result of COVID. And some of the loan payments, they might have been deferred until the end of the loan. So that makes it pretty easy, right? You just can kind of push those back a little bit and they get tacked onto the end or over a different period. But there are some other payments that you might have to pay in a lump sum that you're not really used to having to deal with. Maybe the headings of them, the names like rent, utilities, inventory, whatever, you're used to paying those. But you may have received some benefits, whether they were government related or your landlord or utilities that said, look, we'll allow this to be pushed off a few months because of the craziness here. But at some point, these expenses that you're used to paying may have to be paid quickly and upfront. And if you just think about that normal, right? Like in the traditional way where, sure, of course, I pay my rent every single month. Well, maybe that's been deferred, or I pay my utilities every single month. Maybe that's been deferred. At some point, you may have to pay 3 or 4 months worth of that expense. And, covering several months of those expenses isn't an easy thing. We recognize that. We're thinking about this and we're saying, well, what's the best way to do it? And you might say, well, a line of credit. I've got my line, I've got my credit cards. I can just drop those payments on there and move on. And you definitely can. If you have the ability to do that, of course, that's an option. But you've got to think about how quickly you'll be able to repay that debt. That's something to think about. You drop it on your credit card, you drop it on your line of credit, you start accruing interest immediately. And if you don't have the cash flow relatively quick to pay that back down, you could find that debt just lingering month after month and year after year, accruing interest. And that can be a challenge, right? So we've got to think through that. Now, if you already, the other problem with that is, of course, if you already utilize a sizable amount of your line of credit to operate your business, let's say you are typically using that up and down, but now you've put some of these major combined expenses onto that, you may find yourself in a situation where you don't have the availability on your line, on your credit cards to allow you to do it that way. Now, maybe the bank would increase that, of course, but you still have the same problems here to think about. An increase in a line to put an expense that is kind of the one-time expenses of a combination of multiple things isn't something that you want to always do. Unless you know that you're going to flip the switch and get back in business and become very profitable and be able to pay that down quickly, that could actually put you in a worse spot. You might roll out and start to operate again and feel pretty good, but now you've got this major payment of interest with all this principal lingering for a long period of time. So what are we suggesting? Well, we're suggesting that you might want to consider some permanent working capital, right? Some financing that typically we would say, inventory and rent and all that would be something that would be a short-term financing need. We're saying maybe you need to think about that a little bit more, quote, permanent, maybe longer term, not like 10 years, right? You don't want to pay that rent for 10 years, but maybe you want to think about the permanent working capital, financing that over 2 or 3. And we're not thinking that financing is dropping it on your line and just trying to hit that when you can. We're saying consider taking a real 2 or 3 year term loan to cover some of those expenses in the near future, right? Do that now. Look at the opportunities. Think about it. In a minute, Luke's going to talk about his, about working with teams of professionals to help you analyze and think through this. But you might find yourself looking at items that are traditionally short-term financing and putting that onto the long term so that your monthly cash flow can be more predictable. It gives you the opportunity to really look at it and say, if I drop this into a longer term debt, I know that my payments every month are this. Whereas if I'm putting it on my line of credit, we've got some flexibility there. We might have some compression on the amount that's available to you. So you got to think differently. Now, I've said a lot right there. So let me just try to put that into 2 examples here quickly for you. When you think about your business, it shouldn't typically look like these funnels, right? If you're a retailer, restaurant, manufacturer, your goal is to be as streamlined as possible. The inventory that you have, you want to work through it as quickly as you can, because the more inventory you have on hand, the more it costs you. Now, in the scenario on the left, scenario A, let's call it, right? We came up with very, very good names for this one. Scenario A, the customer has a lower level of inventory than they typically would have, and probably because of the pandemic in this example, right? They may have been able to reduce their inventory before either they shut down or they had some operations reductions because of various restrictions. Maybe they even had perishable inventory that they needed to discard. But as they're trying to reopen or get started back up and move to the larger number of customers, they're going to have to ramp up the core level of inventory to meet the needs. And core level of inventory is the key word here. That means they need a larger investment in inventory right up front just to get to the amount that helps them to feel comfortable and provide for their customers. So as you think through that, typically inventory would be something that you would put on your line of credit, you'd pay it. You'd pay for your line of credit, your customers would pay you, you drop that back on your line, and it's an up and down cycle just like it's supposed to be. But building to your core level of inventory, like this company on the left, they've got to build to a core level to get out of that funnel. And there's a certain amount that they just always have to have on hand. And that could be permanent working capital. That's what we're talking about in that scenario. Now, scenario B is the complete opposite of that. This customer might have been left with an abundance of inventory, which also has some pretty big problems. Again, remember I said a minute ago, the more inventory you have, the more it costs you. And that's also a problem. So basically, this company spent a lot of money to acquire that inventory, and now they've got to sell it as fast as they can. So their investment isn't going to be in inventory, but theirs is going to be in selling their product, right? Collecting the receivables. Maybe that's marketing. Maybe it's working on adding some more employees back to the mix to help manage their inventory progression here. So either way, it's looking at from both sides. If you have too much inventory, like scenario B, you've got a different focus. But I assure you that it has its major expenses, just like scenario A, where you have not enough inventory. No matter which one, you've got to decide the right financing to do that. Short-term, long-term, or a combo of both. And what we like to suggest all the time is circling yourself with what we like to call the team of professionals. And that's what Luke's going to talk about now.
I touched on this a little bit earlier, but there's certainly a lot of people that are out there and their job is to help you. Certainly, today, we're kind of representing the banker side, but, when you just think about, who is on your team of professionals, there can be a lot of people, and there maybe could be more people that are not on this list, but, the more traditional people, your accountant, the CPA, you might have a financial advisor that you work with both on the personal side and on the business side that can provide some advice. Certainly an attorney for the right scenario on the right conversation. Banker, we just hit on a couple of conversations, and that's just a couple. There's certainly a lot of different scenarios that you're going to meet with a banker regarding. You might have a mentor that's out there, been there, done that person who can offer some advice. Certainly family, that kind of goes along with the mentor. There is another one that there's, and this is kind of growing, I think, as you get more creative and you find peer groups, whether that's online, sometimes there's local peer groups. I know some businesses, there's peer groups that similar businesses across the country, and they once a year select a central location. They all get together and they meet, going over their business, talking about their business. That is a really unique group, because that's more like big banks, all banks getting together and having kind of a forum and talking about what's going on in your bank. Is that similar to my bank? What sort of things that you're working on or struggles you're having? A peer group could be very, very effective, depending on the size of it and who's involved in it. But that's certainly one that I think I'm hearing more and more about, to be honest. I wanted to make a point, and I'm kind of forgetting what my point is, and I'm not going to remember it. Darn, I had it, and it was good. It was a good point. But more or less, there are a ton of people out there looking to help you. Oh, I know what it was. I had a client, and it was not a big client, but every year they hosted a meeting. It was once a year, pretty much when they wrapped up their fiscal year, maybe a month or two after that, give the accountant some time to get the numbers together for the year so we can actually have something to review. Say it was maybe in March, but they would host a meeting at their place of business, and it was their banker, it was their attorney, it was their accountant, and it was their insurance agent. And they basically put on a presentation for that group of people, more or less using that subset of people as their board of directors. And they did a year in review from the prior year. And then they basically gave an idea of like, what does it look like for this coming year? You know, what are their objectives? What are they challenged with? Where do they might need some support? And it was really a very effective meeting, and we did it every single year. I don't handle them directly anymore, but I believe that that client still actually handles that meeting every single year. And I just think it's what a great example of someone doing it the right way. And to be honest with you, I don't think it really costs you anything to bring that group together. And we're not talking a super long 5-hour meeting. I think it was maybe 45 minutes to an hour. If there was something obviously bigger to talk about, that might be more of a lengthy meeting. But sometimes it was as short as a half an hour if there really wasn't a lot going on. Certainly, I think if you think about that meeting today, it might have some teeth to it when you're talking about the impact of the pandemic and exactly what we're talking about today. So if you want to click to the next slide. Certainly when you start to think about options, and Ben touched on this a little bit, this is more of your financing options, right? You can talk about, personal investment, AKA using your own cash to finance your business. Almost you become the bank if you're in a fortunate position like that, to have some excess cash and invest it back into your business and become the bank. There's certainly a lot of business owners that have everything kind of wrapped up in their business. And their business is their personal investment for the most part. So you're probably in some way, shape, or form already doing that. The other option is, Ben, if you want to click to the next slide, is traditional financing, similar to what Ben was talking about, whether we're talking about a line of credit, an equipment loan, a mortgage, maybe even a credit card, more of the traditional financing. I think the most interesting thing to think about, when Ben was going through his presentation and going through the cash cycle and doing all that, the hardest thing that I've had to have a conversation about is the pandemic certainly has had a financial impact on a lot of businesses. Some have benefited greatly and they're really seeing an uptick in their business. Others are kind of on the other side of the spectrum where they're struggling and trying to figure it out. When you meet with a bank, the hardest thing is that we're using historical information to kind of predict what the future is going to look like. And that's really where you come into play to try to understand and paint that picture in the future. And I'm more talking about the picture of what the financials are going to be telling you, right? How much revenue are we going to produce? What are our expenses going to look like? And ultimately, what is our profit going to look like? And if we're not turning a profit, maybe discussing why there's a loss and what we can be doing in order to kind of right the ship, if you will. But that's a lot of what we do and a lot of time spent. But you go back to where we started this presentation, the most important piece is understanding what your actual need is. There are lots of options out there, there's no question. Whether that's traditional financing, whether it's your own cash, whether it's an outside person that wants to invest in your business, we would call that like a private investor. Lots of options. But if you don't really understand your need and what that course looks like, you're going to be pretty challenged to figure out. You can have the best financing option available, but if it doesn't make sense for what your need is, then you're just kind of stealing from Peter to pay Paul, if you will. Ben, you want to bring us home here?
I do. Before I go, I just realized I think that guy looks like me though. Like with these glasses on and the
you put a suit on, Ben, and you're there.
I know. I just noticed that. I think my beard is a little grayer. but I'm pretty sure he's older than me. So, all right. Yeah. Happy to bring us home. Luke, thanks for that. Just a couple quick hitters, and then we'll open it up for questions. The first part is I think it's okay to get excited about this. We've thrown a lot at you. We're saying, think about this, think a little differently. And don't let that overshadow the excitement of getting ready to get back to some version of normal. I know we might be days, weeks, or months away from quote normal, but we're going to get there, and get excited about it. Keep it going. Keep that excitement going. That's important. In order to do it, though, you've got to make sure that you're building a plan. And we think it's important to think a little bit more like a startup again. You might not be a new business, but we've got to think about the different times that we're in now. You want to set yourself apart. You need to be ready, and you need to be able to execute that plan. Now's the time to build that plan, to think through your finances, think through your needs, and work with your team of professionals. So understanding your options, like that third pillar there, that's key. Work with your banker, right? Luke and his team are right here in Western New York, right? They're happy to have conversations, talk with their clients and with any of you on the phone about understanding what options are out there. That's critically important. And as you understand those options, pull that team together. Luke listed a bunch of folks on there, but we also like to think, it's not just about grabbing your accountant and your attorney. They're critically important folks, but talk with your family, right? They're trusted advisors too. I know Luke mentioned them, right? But as you go home and you're thinking about it, you're like, okay, what are we going to do now? Here's what my accountant, my attorney, my banker all suggested in the meeting, but you've got to be the one that's comfortable with it. You've got to be the one to execute it. So understand what the options are, working with the team of professionals, building that plan, putting it all together. That's what's going to help you the most. We're always here to help. Happy to take any questions that you may have. So Lauren, I'll hand it back to you for that piece.
Thank you guys so much. This was an awesome presentation, and I know super helpful for a lot of the small business owners listening today. The first question is, would a banker help with the pricing of my business offerings? Like, do you guys provide insight into pricing or help business owners with making those decisions?
Certainly, yeah, we do. I think depending on the type of business, we would be probably more suited to talk about more of a common business. If it's more of a niche business, we might struggle a little bit with that. But there's certainly there's data that's out there that we subscribe to, and this is another kind of data point, if you will, that we use for having discussions with our clients, is using some data, industry data, whether that's financial ratios of what like certain margins look like on like gross profit margins, let's say, on a similar product. If you can get into that level of detail, I think that will certainly shed some light and point you towards more pricing, down to that level. So yeah, we definitely have those conversations. There's no question.
And I think in this particular question, the business owner is service centered, so it's not necessarily based on like cost of goods, right? So who would be the appropriate person to talk to if they're an M&T Bank client, for example?
Yeah, so the data that the bank subscribes to, I mean, you can drill down to whether it's service, whether they're selling an actual hard product. You can get down to margins pretty easily. So, like think if you're a dentist, let's say, there is a massive amount of information to understand, what should I be charging every time I fill a tooth with a filling? And that, I mean, certainly that's out there. Obviously, again, the more niche that business is and the product that they offer, the harder it is to probably drill down into that level of detail. But if it's a more of a business that has a large market and there's a lot of competitors, there's going to be a pretty large amount of data out there that we can analyze to kind of help push us towards an answer to that question.
That's awesome. Thank you. As a new business owner, a little over a year old, that's running on cash flow, how would you recommend starting to build credit? What's like the first couple of steps to take?
Yeah, Luke, I'll jump in on that one. So,
Yeah, sure.
I mean, I think there's an opportunity to start building the relationship first. So that's helpful. It's not all about the numbers, at least with our bank, right? And meaning, as you're going to connect with your branch manager, with your business banking relationship manager, having them understand what your business is and what you do is a great step in I'll say obtaining credit. Of course, we verify credit, cash flow, all those items, but one of the biggest parts is character and ability for folks to get comfortable. So I think the first piece, of course, is build that relationship with your partners at the bank. That's incredibly important. If you're looking product wise, though, probably I don't know, a business credit card is still something that is a great way to start building business credit. But keep in mind, business credit isn't the same as personal credit. It doesn't just drop onto a regular credit report like a personal credit card does. It's a little bit different than that. That's why I suggest starting to build a relationship pretty quickly with your banker. Luke, do you have anything to add to that?
You said it. You said it beautifully. Big difference between building credit, right? Between like personal and business. Again, I think you're spot on, Ben. Is to establish a relationship, with your local bank. Meet someone. If go through the interview process. If you don't kind of like what they're saying, try someone else. Obviously there needs to be some level of connection there. Where you think you're actually getting some value out of the conversation and can direct you, to the right, services and products and advice. So, yeah, I think you said it great.
And are there best practices in terms of that short-term debt or revolving debt in terms of percentage of revenue or percentage of assets? Like, are there recommended amounts for that?
I mean, I think the rule of thumb is for a line of credit, this is not black and white. So nothing in the, sorry about that. Nothing in the business banking side is black and white. It's all kind of a little gray. But if you think about 10% of your annual sales is generally the size of a line of credit that makes sense. And that effectively covers roughly, as you think about accounts receivable, roughly a 30-day repayment terms for an accounts receivable, right? That's where that number comes from.
Great, that's really helpful. The next question is, what is the right way to build a team? Peers always seem set to get in on it, but don't always bring value to the business.
That's a good question. In my opinion, it's probably more art than science, with maybe a sprinkling of luck in there, that you just happen to be establishing a relationship with the right people. Certainly, there's no question that word of mouth comes into play here. Talking with other people, and you can say, geez, looking for, I'm looking for a new insurance agent, or I'm looking for a new banker, or I'm looking for a new accountant. Do you have any suggestions? Maybe gather, 2 or 3 of the names that keep popping up in those conversations, and go and make an appointment with those people and see which one you think you walk away with, where, you have a connection with, that you think you're actually going to derive value from. Again, more art than science. And again, maybe a little bit of luck with just the right person at the right time and the right connection, and boom, you're getting exactly what what you're looking for out of that particular relationship.
And a lot of people over the years, have found themselves in and out of networking groups, and there are some that are great, and other ones that don't supply the leads that you find appropriate. And don't waste your time in the ones that don't provide you the time. So if you go weekly to a breakfast, or you join this networking group and you're going month after month without a lead, you got to decide, is it worth the time? Where's the value with that? So that's something to really consider as well. By the way, one other piece would be you can talk to your banker. Again, as you're building that relationship with your banker, us bankers are connected to a lot of people in the community. We get the privilege of talking to all different types of industries and businesses. You need a resource, we've got one.
Well said.
The last question we'll take today is talking a little bit about riskier business types. So in this particular example, they're talking about the entertainment business, financing shows, things that maybe aren't necessarily possible today. But how is the bank thinking about some of these industries that have been riskier generally, but also even more so probably because of the pandemic?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm going to take that, but I'll take it anyway. Ben is.
Yeah, it's like, I'm glad you took it.
Yeah, I'm sure you did. Having a lot of conversations like this, right? At the end of the day, big picture, banks are about managing risk, right? When you think about a bank, and Ben and I were actually having this conversation last week, a bank doesn't get to enjoy any of the equity side. So if you knock it out of the ballpark with your business and you're enjoying kind of the fruits of that, you'll enjoy that because your business is going to be worth more. Think about it from the bank perspective that when we offer, let's say, a term loan on a line of credit, and let's say their interest rate is 5.5%, the only thing we're going to get is 5.5%. So you have to understand that we don't necessarily take outlandish risks because the risk reward ratio is not there for banks. So that's why you see banks so conservative, right? We don't share on the equity side, we just share on the debt side, and the only rate of return we get is whatever your interest rate is on your loans. So with that said, it becomes challenging. It's not impossible, but it's very challenging for businesses that were significantly impacted by COVID. And the question isn't necessarily what has happened to the business. The real question is, where is it going? So we can certainly look at, again, I mentioned this a little bit, is the challenge with the pandemic, with businesses that are significantly impacted, is that all of the data points that we're going to look at are during that pandemic performance, right? So if you looked at 2020 performance and you were significantly impacted, well, unfortunately, any bank or anybody making an intelligent decision on something is going to be looking at past performance, and we use past performance to really predict what the future looks like. So when you're sitting down with a banker, you have to be altering what that future outlook looks like. So more or less, here's how the pandemic impacted me, but looking forward, here's how I'm adjusting to that and painting the picture of, what is going to be different about it. What are you adjusting, whether that's on the revenue side or the expense side, to continue to turn a profit? And ultimately, the profit is where the bank is interested, because that's what ultimately repays any loan you're talking about, whether it's short-term, long-term, so on and so forth. It's the profit that repays. So that's really where the conversation would drive on a riskier type of business. Certainly the bank understands the risks involved in certain industry types. Certainly entertainment. I have a friend of mine who's a booking agent for more singer-songwriter stuff. He works out in New York City. I talk to him, a couple times a week, and it's kind of the same thing. Like, he doesn't know what to do. And he's starting to tell me, the owner of the business is starting to really let people go, and they're trying to figure it out. But at some point, with what the question is surrounding is, people will start to go to shows again, right? So we just need to understand, does that mean people need to get vaccinated before that happens? Or, depending on the state you're booking shows in, are you going to have a revenue opportunity that's going to support whatever loan you're looking for? And can I turn a profit to actually repay that loan? That's more of where that conversation goes. But I don't know if you want to add anything to that, but that's it. It's again, more art than science sometimes on these conversations, especially when you get impacts like a pandemic that are, hopefully we can say, an anomaly, right? It's not going to happen every single year. So you have to make those adjustments in the conversation.
It's really helpful. Well, thank you both for these incredible insights And thanks everyone for joining us and for your excellent questions. We truly appreciate the partnership with M&T and you sharing your insight with our companies. So thank you so much. And this will be recorded and we'll send it out to everyone afterwards as well.
Right.
So have a great morning.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Have a great day.